My experience with recording my thoughts and ideas and responses to things that happen in my life didn't start with photography. It started with writing. And I was never a writer by profession because it was something that I started since I was 5 years old. I've been keeping a diary. The process of keeping a diary and recording everything was obviously something that started really early in my life, and it was habitual, and it was a way of reflection. It was an obsessive need to remember, and a hyper awareness of time passing. And I think that what happened was, at the age of 22, I picked up a camera and I stopped writing to a large extent, and I just started making pictures. In the process of making pictures constantly through life and using it in a similar tool to reflect and to work out ideas, work out problems, kind of come to terms with things that I was grappling with in my personal life. When I became a professional photographer, as in like when I started getting paid for work, when I started getting commissioned for work, there was a lot of pressure, especially at photo school, to put into words and to define your work. And I think it is really important to be able to talk about your work, because in order to understand it, you often need to name it. And if that is sullied by an industry need to contain your work within boxes, even like documentary work, a lot of personal documentary work that I come across, and I did this too in my early years. You know, you'd start making this project because you felt drawn to it, and you wanted to see it, and you wanted to see it because you wanted to understand it. And you'd go in and you'd make the pictures, and it's a very visceral response. And people who work with film probably understand this in a more practical way, because the process of working with film is that if you're working on a long project, or if you're on the road and you don't have access to photo labs, when you're making your work, the picture that you take at each moment only lives in your mind. It's an imagination of your photograph. And so you're building your project based on something that's in your head. And it's an intuitive process. Whereas digitally, you can always come home, you'll upload your pictures and you'll be like, okay, I'm missing that establishing shot, I'm missing a couple of portraits, and then you start building it in a really cognitive way. And it becomes a conscious thing. Whereas I feel like one of the greatest strengths about photography is where it lives between the conscious and the subconscious. What you want to see, what you feel drawn to, comes from your inner psyche. I mean, I did a masterclass about 10 years ago, and it went for about 3 years. And you met with the same group of people 3 times a year. And you bring a new project and you bring an ongoing project. And after each person's critique, the masters would do a selection of 12 to 15 photographs and pin it up on the wall. And for the whole week, you're surrounded by these projects. And what I noticed over the course of 3 years was that each photographer had an itch to see a particular thing, and it was different for everyone. And it was just like something that they could just never get enough of. They're just like scratching and like trying to get to the bottom of something. And it is kind of like psychological problem solving. If you only work within the pressures and the confines of industry expectations, which is governed by time constraints, by budget, by editors that are used to working on very specific formulas for stories, I think that you can really cut yourself short and curtail a much broader, much more poetic and intuitive response to what it is that you actually want to figure out, which is why you're spending months, years shooting the same thing over and over again. So that's what I mean by the sheer act of photography. It's sort of being able to kind of switch that voice off a little bit, not completely turn away from being able to talk about your work or understanding your work, but being able to do that without necessarily being swayed all the time by industry formulas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Part of that same interview, you also talked about this need to nurture the instinctive impetus to photograph your life, and this idea of sort of the minutia and the confusion and the sort of the infinite complexity of what normally we would see as our sort of simple daily life. And in the context of that question is, we have lots of photographers reaching out to us right now who, when they first started photographing, they were photographing sort of at a pandemic, right? And it was sort of exotic and different, and masks and gloves. And then now, as we're more sheltering in place, and you and I talked about this just briefly, it reminded me of having like a child at home in the early days, where you have this sort of confined world. And just, curious about, just curious about that sort of intersection of the familiar within your photographic practice.
Well, I suppose I probably came to a lot of things in my life out of boredom. I grew up in a really shitty town. You can see the pictures of it in the Gold Coast book. It was a bit of a dead end town with a beach. And there's no bookstores there. There's nothing to kind of cater to anyone that might be interested in anything cultural or intellectual. So I was really, really, really bored. Mm-hmm. And it kind of forces you, there was a great article, might have been in the New York Times, about the joy and the tenacity of creativity and expression when you're bored as a kid. When you're locked in the room and you got nothing to do and you're like standing on your head, or like, the rugs, the raft, and the floors, the ocean. And I feel like that has largely been something that I've held with me, and that lives in my photography as well. It's like, I became a mother and I was stuck at home, and there was nothing, I mean, aside from the fact that I was really psychologically struggling in the process of becoming a mother, I also needed a way to play, and I needed a way to create. And it began as an exercise. I'm here and I can't leave, and this is what I've got to deal with. What can I make pictures of? And then I start making pictures, and I'm like, okay, well, this makes more sense to me than that. So I start photographing more in this way, and then I kind of run the course of photographing that way. Then I force myself to try something new. And it begins as play, and then when you kind of put it all out in front of you and you have a look at it, and you allow your photographs to speak back to you, you kind of see maybe that there's something there. Mm-hmm. And I think that this whole idea of photographing the other and the spectacle, it's I don't know, say it's like an easy impetus, but when you're confronted with a spectacle, obviously your synapses fire, you're interested, and you want to capture it because it's something that you've never seen before. But there's something very, very joyful, even if it's dark subject matter, in your daily life and in what you do, to try and re-see the things that you see every day, and to try and confront it in a way that you haven't confronted it before. And that's, that comes from just being in one place, and for me anyway, and just being really bored and trying to work out what to do. Yeah. I mean, that's how the COVID diary started in a way. Like it just started from extreme boredom, and then starting to make pictures, and then starting to write again, because I suppose in a way because I did feel limited in what I could take photographs of. And I, was concerned, I suppose, of repeating myself over and over and over again. And so writing, in a way, opens up another dimension of understanding to marry with the photography.
Yeah, one of the comments that we have gotten a lot, and people looking at that feature, is just how exquisite the writing is with, and there's a similar quality of a vulnerability that meets clarity, that meets just a sincerity, and yeah. So I don't know if you're often celebrated as a writer, but it's been it's been really lovely to read the words. And I know that with folks who've been struggling to make sense too, I think one of the things you and I talked about was this sort of cultural trivialization of the domestic life, but in particular the female experience, and that it's one thing to be interested and captivated, and it's another thing to feel like those images have value. And that for many, many women that I know, and then also men who invest in a domestic life as caretakers or whatever, that coming to this sense that photography has value. I mean, they know it does in their own practice of making, but getting over that sort of cultural hurdle where we've sort of trivialized images from the domestic sphere. And I'm just wondering how you were able to creatively move within that tight sphere and make meaning of that time creatively or artistically.
I suppose it meant everything to me. So I didn't have to create personal meaning from it. It was something that I really, really struggled with. I lived a life for 11 years where I was maybe on a plane for every 2 weeks, and I had no one to answer to but myself, and I only ever did things that I really wanted to do for the most part. And that switch over to domestic life, where the easiest way to describe it is what was once the road ahead of you becomes the hallway to the bathroom. What was once the sun becomes the light switch above you. It's your entire universe compressing and coalescing down into this very, very tight sphere. And this is where you live, and this is almost the entirety of your existence. And with that collapsing down comes, as you can imagine, great pressure. And for me, that has incredible meaning, to try and understand what my position is within that pressure, how to deal with it, how to come to terms with it. Because I found myself very sad. I found myself very angry, and very resentful. But what was it exactly that I was angry about? And photographing and thinking about it and reading about it and doing all the research helped me put into words and give my feelings legitimacy and power. So finding meaning was not a difficult thing in my experience. Finding meaning for the viewer is a completely different thing. I've since the book designer that I work with for the Gold Coast book is also my book designer for this book, and he, for me, is a really collaborative partner in my work. So often what I'll do is I'll bring a work to him that's like what I feel is 75% complete, and then what he'll tell me is about 50% complete. And then we'll workshop it together and work out, this work about motherhood, like, he listens to me and all my feelings and what I think, and then he'll be like, well, there's no edge to it. It's too saccharine. It's too sweet. You're making so many pictures that you've seen before around motherhood, and the book that you're trying to make hasn't really been made before. So you can't repeat those images. You have to rethink the kinds of images that you're putting forth to articulate to the viewer exactly how you're feeling. You
Mm-hmm.
can't expect them to just conjure it in their head because they see a cute picture of your baby, you know, and that was the challenge,
Mm.
right? Because when you're in it, it's really difficult to see outside it, especially something that's so intensely personal.
Yeah. And if you're okay with it, I can also screen share that PDF. We'll see it. It might
Sure.
take a minute for it to load. So I appreciate
Yeah.
y'all's patience as we do that.
So, you know, in terms of meaning to the audience and establishing, creating that meaning, I still struggle with that. I haven't, you know, in the edit, in the structure, in the choice of paper, in the all of those things add to the interpretation of the work, and it's still definitely a work in progress. I would say, I mean, the book was supposed to be in print now, at the printing house, and ready to launch by ARL, but now ARL is cancelled or postponed. They haven't decided yet, so that's not going to happen this year, which means that I could potentially still keep shooting it, which I kind of am. I have the struggle is,
Are you seeing the book?
I
You
can
are
see
seeing
it.
it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm going to start scrolling. It might take a second to get to the top.
I've had issues with finding a publisher, which is probably speaks directly to your question in terms of finding meaning. So in terms of creating meaning to an audience, let's just say that every female publisher I've shown the work to has gotten it immediately, and every male publisher, like the worst response was with a duo of male publishers who are brothers, and they just didn't get it at all, and it didn't matter how much I was trying to explain the work to them, they just didn't get it. So I didn't succeed in creating meaning for them.
Right.
I mean, there is such a trivialization of this whole experience, you know, there's no respect in it. And I think women, I mean, I found it difficult to respect this whole thing myself before I became a mother, before I came to terms with becoming a mother. So I can imagine I've got my work really cut out for me if I hope to create meaning for other people with this. But
yeah, well, thank you for that work, because I think there's so many of us who, who's, I guess what I mean to say is that, you know, when you think like your experience, right, of the tightening world, of the pressure, you know, how does the collapsing down, this mixture of curiosity and even depression, and those aren't your words, but like, I feel like that you're describing also this place that so many people find themselves in right now. And,
exactly.
and that I do think that there are folks who have cut paths through these more difficult terrain, and that these images do in some ways offer a kind of emotional map. And that's a great gift, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like the work was definitely a segue to the COVID diary, or the segue is a continuation of this work. They kind of blur between each other, because I literally spent the first night away from my child since he was born September last year. So, and all of this stuff started to go down in February. So I probably only spent like a couple of months starting to travel a little bit, starting to spend some time away and to work away, and to find myself outside of this role as mother. And then, you know, coronavirus came, and my gallery has shut down. I'm working from home again. I can't really go anywhere. I definitely can't fly anywhere. And it's just kind of brought me back to that same place again. So the segue is pretty seamless from the book to what I'm photographing and what I'm writing now.
And I hope everybody's getting to enjoy these images. It's scrolling a little slow, so it's kind of loading as we scroll. So sorry
Sorry,
about
it's
how
a really
disjointed that is, but they're
it's a really
beautiful.
large file.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful work. Um, you know, when you and I were talking briefly the other day, you pointed out that in your first book, Gold Coast, the visual language of that book was very disciplined, very square, just very disciplined, and that you felt like the visual language of Bowerbird Blues, that it's a different visual language. I wonder if you'd talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's kind of hard to describe when the introduction to Bowerbird, which you've shown, is the square work.
All right, it's
So
coming,
you
it's
kind of have
rolling.
to.
Try to keep moving.
I know, sorry. So what you see on the screen, the image contained within the white negative space is the prologue to the book, and it's a little booklet that's sewn on top of
Oh,
the actual book.
wow.
So if you see the border that's looks like tree branches underneath it, that's the cover of the main body of work.
Wow.
And it's supposed to be vascular. There's the tree branches, but it's supposed to mimic veins. And the visual language of the two books is very different. People who are familiar with the old work can possibly build meaning into the fact that the prologue is photographed in a similar style, and serves as a bridge between an older part of my life and a newer part of my life. People who are not familiar with my previous work will hopefully be able to find meaning in this very, I find the square format, and I find shooting medium format, a slower, more distant, more measured approach to my subject, be it environmental or be it human. And because it's slower, because I kind of take the time to very carefully compose and manually decide the settings, and I was very comfortable with it in my previous photo life because I really like keeping a distance. I really like having a thick pane of glass between myself and everybody else and the world. And that comes from old traumas, old stuff, where I felt safe at that distance. And then when you get past this initial prologue, it becomes this extremely, extremely visceral experience where I feel like the work not only cannot stand at a distance, but gets into your nose. It just like presses right up against you. And this is my experience of becoming a mother as well, and it's supposed to reflect that, is being able to confront the world at a distance, including the people that I love most, including the man that I'm falling in love with, all that kind of stuff, just like at that distance. And then you get pregnant, and it's just like inside your body, literally. Like you cannot tune out. Like the minute my mind would like float to an idea that I'm working on, or then you'd feel a kick, then you'd feel sick in your stomach, or then it's like a very visceral experience contained in your body when you get pregnant. And then it just keeps going even after you have your baby. If you're breastfeeding, it's like pain and it's uncomfortable, and you're always on a tether, on a leash, and you can't get very far away from it. So the visual language that I tried to employ was designed to give more of that kind of experience to life than the distant, measured experience. And that's why there's such a dramatic shift in the language in that book.
Yeah, I love how you, I love how you both describe and capture this sort of, like you saying, that visceral, that feels so true. Yeah.
So there's also writing in this book, as you
Mm-hmm.
can see. We're trying to work out a few different sort of graphic solutions to how comfortable I felt incorporating writing with these pictures. And so the white columns that you see, they're
Mm-hmm.
actually pages, half pages that you kind of have to open to see the writing inside.
Mm. Wow. Um, I'm just let us scroll through a minute. One of the other pieces of your writing and interviews that has been pretty meaningful to us over the last couple of weeks, as we start to think about creating archives or start to think about what it means to be photographing, is you had said that much of what we make now as photographers, as people who in a very real sense make documents of history, will escape our immediate understanding. But by denying our personal photography because we cannot find a professional home for them, we run the risk of denying a future for images whose importance we have no concept of. And I think that's pretty relevant in this time where if we try too hard on this side to make meaning, it might sort of get in the way. And I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit.
Well, I think that if you look at history books, if you read history books, the data and the information mined from those books come from a very local experience and come from a recording that isn't necessarily designed with the passage of time in mind, which means that, you know, the information is mined from letters that someone wrote to their mother, or family photographs, or, you know, strange photographs that someone took of every single salad bowl they ever bought, or whatever it is. You know, it's like archaeology. You know, what remains throughout history are things that at the time people didn't understand the value of. And the value is not necessarily placed in that singular object or document or photograph. It's meaning that the future person is going to place in that object, in the context and with respect to where they are. So I suppose I was thinking that if everything is calculated, if everything has to have a place and a meaning now, we're just creating that in our heads. But what will remain through history? I mean, if you imagine history as being this big sieve and all this information passes through it, what remains within that sieve is not something that we'll ever be able to understand from where we're standing. So if we feel it, I feel like there's almost a responsibility as visual storytellers, or as any kind of storyteller, to tell the story, to tell the moment, whatever it is. And then you just kind of like cast it to the winds of time, and it may have a place or it may not. But I mean, that's what we do. You know, we're scribes, we're clerics.
These are so beautiful, just really.
Thank you.
And now that we're in this part of this work, I totally see what you mean about how the language had changed. And did that just sort of arise pretty intuitively and spontaneously for you, this language change, or did you struggle with it?
No, I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. You know, when you're trapped on a couch with a baby stuck on your breast, what's at hand is often whatever's at hand. So
Right.
my phone, my 5D from 2007, my uh, screenshots from my baby monitor, yeah, whatever I could find, whatever I could reach is the way that it began.
Wow.
So were you yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. You mentioned that this white paper with the text on it is a fold out, and yeah, can
It's
you
like a
talk
half
a little bit about the
page.
material of like what it feels like to turn? Because there's also some other inset images that look like they're on
Right.
different paper.
Right. So the fractious nature of the visual language is also reflected in the physical structure of the book. And when I say fractious, I mean that it's not like a uniform matching suite of aesthetic in the picture making, in the way that the paper stock is used, in the way that the printing is being used. Like you've seen some pictures that are reddish and bluish, they're Riso prints. And it's kind of a more refined graphic nod to this idea that you're kind of taking this very multidimensional and ambivalent human experience, because motherhood is very ambivalent. You love it and you hate it at the same time. Like, oh, he's so beautiful. Oh, what a blight on my life. You know, you feel the same thing at the same time. That the work and the way that the book is structured and the experience of being like, oh, what is this? Oh, it's a pack list that's 800 items long to go away for a weekend. You know, I mean, just things like that where you find secrets, where you find objects, where you find alongside that pack list a piece of poetry. Because for me, that was my experience. I'm trying to kind of coalesce my lived experience of becoming a mother in a physical form in a book that I can hand over to someone as evidence.
And you know, I like, there's a way that I appreciate this so much in terms of the evidence or the transparency or even the vulnerability that you're willing to share, because I think in some ways, while we trivialize the female experience, we also overly romanticize it as well. And I think it's rare, at least it was for me when I was raising kids, to sit in a circle with women who would say, I love this being with all my body, and somebody needs to keep me from drowning him in the tub. Like the both feelings arise. And so often we're not given permission to speak to both sides, and that there's something really, and that the images become in a way richer and more beautiful because they contain both sides of that experience. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. I think that a very profound realization for me was that my husband didn't understand my experience.
Yeah.
Feeling alone in something that you're supposed to be in partnership with was a profound experience. It was a very strong sense of not being seen, not being heard, not being respected in the monumental metamorphosis that happens when you become a mother. And the more research that I've done into it, the more it makes sense, but also I'm floored by how little information there is out there. I mean, there's a reproductive psychologist based out of New York called Alexandra Sachs, and she's brought this a term back into relative popularity called matrescence, which is a play on the word adolescence. So we go through these very, very reformative times in our lives as humans. It happens when a baby becomes a toddler, where the movement, the act of being on the floor to being on your feet and having access to bench tops, having access to the world in a way that you never had access to, the ability to move away from your parents should you want to do that, is an indicator of extreme social change, psychological change, hormonal change, physiological change. So it happens then. It happens again when we go through puberty. And I mean, if you have a look at the ocean of creative content around coming of age, adolescence, puberty, cinema, literature, poetry, music. I mean, it's all there because of that incredible transition, this total transformation in who you are as a person across every level happens. And then as well, you move again further out into the world. You access friends, you get a license, you gain autonomy, independence. Hormonally, you completely change. Physically, you completely change. Your priorities change. All of that happens at adolescence. And it happens one more time. And it happens pretty much exclusively to women when we become a mother. Hormonally, physically, socially. You don't see your friends anymore. You only see family. Like, all of that stuff happens again. This incredible transformation. And yet, what is recorded of that? The respect afforded to it, the understanding of it. I mean, if you look at the understanding of the female body alone in a medical sense, it is shocking how opaque that information is. The default human body in medical research is the male body. So we have very little understanding. A lot of it is myth. A lot of it is passed down oral histories. And if we have lost our village, well, now it looks like as if we've kind of regained it, maybe. But if we were heading into a direction where we lost our village and we lost our foremothers and we lost the women in our lives who were around the generation before and the generation before to guide us through this process, women have found themselves largely alone in this experience. And the living within a patriarchal society, I mean, just informs the isolation that women live throughout their matrescence. So, in making the book, for me, was also about being heard, and also about, I mean, it was kind of for my partner in a way, for me to be able to understand what it is that I'm experiencing, articulate it in the best way that I know how, and give it to him.
Wow.
More like an ode to his ignorance. Does that? That's harsh. He is out taking care of my child at the moment, though, so I give him that.
The changing language, and this will be the last piece I say, and then I think we'll open it up for other people. But, I've been studying the physicist Arthur Zions. He's a contemplative physicist, and he is famously known for repeating this one phrase over and over, which is an object well contemplated. And by well contemplated, he means over time with careful attention, opens up a new organ of perception. And I do think I feel that when I am able to sit with a book like this, or able to sit with somebody else's experience, is that maybe I didn't spend all that time in that experience, but there's a way through the book that the experience becomes well contemplated. And then there's this new organ of perception that opens up for me, and that now I'm in an experience that's not mine necessarily, but I'm gonna see the world different after I do that. And I do feel like work like this that has had such deep connection and commitment in it, and vulnerability and transparency and honesty. I do think it does that for us. It opens up that new organ of perception. So I appreciate
that. Is literally the pinnacle of what I could ever hope to do with any body of work. I mean, you know, when you go into a museum to look at art, look at any kind of work, my only goal on a good day, on a lucky day, is to walk out and to be moved either emotionally or intellectually by something that I've seen. It's what I search for in cinema, in novels, in any kind of artistic pursuit, is to be elevated somehow in the way that I see or experience something that I didn't know before. And if this work is able to do that and to shed a little bit of light in the complex experience it is to do something so common and so mundane that so many people go through, that is sort of mission accomplished on my behalf, I suppose.
Yay. Well, I will keep scrolling, but I do want to open up for questions, and you can type in the chat window. And while they're doing that, is there anything you wanted to add before we get to those questions?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I was just pretty excited about having this is my first Zoom talk, and I'm fascinated about the idea of people having conversations from their personal domestic spaces, and having other people watch it. So I kind of toyed with the idea of not doing it at my desk, but to do it sort of like lounging on my couch or in the bathtub, you know, like being able to open up a privacy in this. So I don't have any sort of measured agenda or anything, just whatever you guys want to ask. Just feel free.
I love the idea of the bathtub chats. I mean, I don't have a very nice looking bathtub, but that's such an intimate, it's meditative, and the practice of like kind of getting clean, but you don't really get clean in the bath, you know, like it's that weird liminal space of like sitting in your own filth, but also relaxing and like all of,
and whatever conversation that would bring about, so be it, you know.
So I don't see anybody with any questions yet, but if you, like Susan said, you can, oh, here we go. All right, so from Adrian, wondering what the prologue separation is about other than the change in format. So the book in the beginning of the book prologue, and I'm also interested in the materiality of that too. It looked like there was like stitching, and Adrian's also saying, what is it supposed to make us feel?
Okay, so I'm trying to see if I have it with me. Do you want me to get the physical object and to kind of explain it? I've got
that would be amazing. Yeah.
All right. I'll be right back.
Oh, I'm so excited. You know, when you were showing those, the first few pages, and I saw this little stitching on one side, and I couldn't quite tell what was going on, but I was really excited about it. I think we just get another. Oh, that's so sweet, Maria. Marie just said, there aren't really words to describe my reaction, but your work is stunningly provocative, both emotionally and intellectually. So it was interesting to hear you describe your joyful experience leaving a museum. I don't speak Italian, but I'm going to say grazie mille. Is that, I don't know how to
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't know if you can see, this is the cover. Can you see? I don't know if
so
you can
Susan,
see me,
if
or
you,
is it screen sharing?
Let me stop the share, and that should pull you as you start to talk. That should put you.
So this is the physical dummy at the moment, which was literally just printed off my book designer's laser printer. If you look closely, every sort of graphic element of this book has a built-in meaning behind it. And the idea is that we build in the meaning. If it translates, great. If it doesn't translate, it just exists as a graphic choice for people. But we try and build it in. And it's funny because sometimes when you build in layers of meaning, people make stuff up on their own as well and build in their own meaning with that, which is oftentimes that liminal space in good art that becomes profound and personal to the viewer. You build in your own meaning to work that already contains meaning, and hopefully it becomes this third thing that means something to you. So this stitching, it's red string and it's supposed to be quite irregular, and it's a nod to traditional Chinese books and the way that stitching works, except it's disorganized, so to speak. It's random, it's disorganized, and it's also a nod to cesarean stitches, blood-soaked stitches. Yeah.
I was going to do a quick technical. For those of you, there are two ways to view your screen. You have gallery view, which is going to make the Ying's picture very small, but if you switch to the other view, she will be the only thing on your screen and you'll get to see the image larger. So just so you know.
Maybe, should I have this at not vertical? Maybe. No?
I think you're doing great.
Okay. And so the prologue part you'll see here is literally sewn into the main body of the work. And the prologue, I mean, the choice of cover, this image of my son pressing his face up against the curtains, is a metaphor for birth, the sort of a nod to the on-call phenomenon where some children are born still contained within the amniotic sac. And if you've never seen it before, if you Google ENCAUL, birth, you'll see all these images of these little babies pressed up against this translucent amniotic sac. It's pretty amazing. And the prologue are all photographs of a life that is pretty distant and observational. So there's not very many people in it. It's just meandering through life at a safe distance with a contemplation of possibility. So ideally, these are kind of like quiet, pregnant pauses, excuse the pun. And occasionally you'll see a man. But you never really know who it is. You never really meet or are introduced to a true protagonist. There are metaphors built into each image. Like here is what is actually a handprint, my handprint of sunscreen on a man's chest. For me, that's a metaphor of telling a story. Cave painting, the most archaic form of recording experience, and it is literally my imprint on someone who I almost unwittingly embarked on a life that I never expected to embark on with. There's this sort of like very boring brick environment with a tiny little sign in the corner that says love. And then you kind of meet my partner in this introduction, but he doesn't play a very big role in my life prior to having a child, which is kind of the way that I was approaching relationships, to be honest, to begin with. I mean, like I said, I was traveling a lot. I had the life of an itinerant photographer, and I was not accountable to anyone except myself. So this is that life, the pre-baby life. And then you have this introduction to a very intense, no white border, all-consuming, full bleed, can't get it out of your nose or out of your skin or out of under your skin experience of having another human being growing inside you. And that's the introduction. And the actual It's a very long
I'm sorry.
introduction.
We've had someone ask too if you could switch to horizontal view, if that
Okay,
would be okay.
sure.
Yeah, thank you.
That better?
Great. Yeah, that's much better. Thanks.
Okay. Cool. All right. And then this is where the narrative, I suppose, really begins. And it's just a belly shot. And this is where I suppose the actual nuances of what I'm actually experiencing starts to be articulated. The first picture in the narrative is of the belly, and the first piece of text which comes here, which is this half page that I was describing, says, "I have a son growing in my belly. I wonder what primordial sludge this new life is dredging from the oldest parts of me." So it's this idea that, I have someone growing inside me. I have no idea what he knows, and I have no idea what he's dredging out, but I feel that it's ancient, including old hurts, including old fears, all that kind of stuff comes to the front, but I have no idea what's going to happen with all that stuff. And it just sort of sets the scene for this journey. And you kind of read it as, and it becomes more and more intense. And then towards the end, well, the main part of the work is all photographed inside my apartment. And then towards the end, you start seeing glimpses of the outside again. You start also seeing a life that where you stop seeing his face, the child's face. Everything just doesn't revolve around him anymore. And it's just life outside again, but in a new way. And that's the conclusion.
That's
Thank
amazing.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, that was very thorough. And I'm a material person, so that was like really nice. Thank you.
Right.
So a quick question, just to clarify, somebody was asking, so will each of these books be hand sewn and produced very similar to that structure? So they'll be like hand numbered artist book style publication.
Right.
With the exposed scene.
Exactly. So
Excellent.
there will be a cover. This is just a protective cover at the moment, not indicative of the actual cover, but it is mostly designed, or will be designed to, like, at the moment, the protective cover, just is a piece of folded cardboard, but the actual cover will look nothing like that, but will be sensitive to the design on the inside, but will be able to be taken out, or if anything, just sealed from the back. So when you open it, this spine will be exposed. That is so that for practical purposes, when you send these books out to bookstores and they go into the shelves, you want to be able to make sure that these little corners are protected and they don't get beaten up too much, because the paper that I'm using is very, very tactile. It's kind of like a soft, I want to say voluptuous paper. And the way that this is bound is a French fold, which means that you can, each page is folded over, so that when the book lies open like this, and in the experience of turning the pages, it feels full to your fingers, fleshy.
Mm-hmm.
That's lovely. And so like on the narrative, it's so beautiful. So it's kind of also like an archival storage folder too, where you open up the folder and you pass the images through, but they remain in that protective shield, which is nice. Great.
Exactly.
Okay, so then we've got VJ is curious about intimacy and how our new normal, the new norm, might affect the way that we documentary photographers portray our subjects moving forward. And I'm assuming, VJ, you're talking about like where we are in the pandemic right now and the new norm that might be constructed after this. So yeah, what do you feel about that? That's big.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so many people have a individual and fraught relationship with intimacy in their work, because are we public storytellers? And if we are, how much do we want to put on show? I think is a question that people who do personal photography really have to grapple with. I have a continuous sort of tension in that experience. The Gold Coast book was a very, very personal work for me, despite the quite distant way that it was photographed. But the crux of the story, the crux of the book, is about a double murder that I witnessed and the trauma around that. And the fact that the place that I grew up in, the Gold Coast, was the crime capital, but also the tourist capital of Australia, which means that a lot of the violence and trauma that happens is squashed for the sake of real estate prices. And, you know, in making the book, there was a lot of discussion with my book designer about how much do I want to let people know about what I've gone through. I mean, I have an opinion about the place. I've done the research. I want to be able to talk about the issue, but do I need to be in it? And he seems to believe, he did believe, and now I am convinced since the book has come out, that it was an important element. And this is where the power of a really, really great graphic designer or book designer, if you want to make a book, comes in, because they help find graphic solutions that make it palatable for you and the viewer. And the way that it ended up working in the Gold Coast book was the information about my personal role in it and the murders and everything came at the end of the book, and it came as a zine that you could take out and you could throw away. So I did stuff like, I think a real estate agent in China wanted to buy a box of the books because they were interested in investing on the Gold Coast. And I just sent them the box and I threw away the zine. I mean, it's just like, I didn't want them to know about my role in it. I didn't want them, and so for me, that felt like a safe space where I didn't have to have my place in it, but I could still send out my message, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And have you had moments where you have wanted to self-separate and haven't, or like that you've had feedback from the lack of separation that has pushed you in a different?
Well, the COVID diaries is probably a continuous, and this is where I think Instagram is an interesting prospect, because Instagram doesn't feel as permanent or as deliberate as a book. So I feel like I can put an image and I can put a piece of writing on Instagram, and eventually it'll get lost in my feed. And unless someone really, 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 really wants to find it, they're not going to find it. And so it feels like a relatively safe medium space to experiment with things that are really personal. And then if I change my mind later on, I just go back and delete it, and I think that's what a lot of people use with Instagram. If COVID diaries becomes a thing, if it later on becomes a body of work that I want to publish, I'll have to kind of reassess again all of the content and ask myself how comfortable I am with doing it. But I do think that none of those things should stop you from making the work. So VJ, if you're feeling it, make it, and decide later if anyone gets to see it.
I think that's fantastic advice right now. I really do. I think that we often, get the cart before the horse, and this idea
Totally.
that, follow this this intuition, you know, photography for the sheer act of doing it. And right, ask the hard questions later, right? When I think that's great advice, especially on this.
I mean, I don't usually condone what's the adage? Shoot first, think later, or something.
Yeah.
I don't like, it's not necessarily something that I guide my life with, but if I am the subject and if I'm the collateral, I suppose I feel like it's worth the damage, because I also feel like I can protect myself. Whereas I can't necessarily do that for other people if it's about other people. So that's a whole nother ethical minefield that I generally steer clear of.
Yeah. I think we had one other question from Daniela. Do you see that? Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of leads actually into what she's asking too, which is like, she's saying, you know, as the story being a book, and now that the book's being delayed as well, or while you're in the development of a book, how do you know when to stop producing elements to add? And specifically with this book, because it is a personal record, you have unlimited time to keep finding what that narrative is. Yeah. So what's your moment of, okay, this is enough?
It's about urgency. So the urgency that I felt, the mother rage that I felt has started to ebb, you know. So you need sometimes that urgency. I mean, I self-published my first book, and I will probably self-publish this one as well. The cycle of self-publishing, once the book is made, I believe that as a publisher, you also have the responsibility to push that narrative out into the world. Like, to do artist talks, to do book signings, to write articles, everything that you need to do to put the work out there as a publisher, you kind of need to do. And for me, operating from a place of pure ambition is not sustainable and not so motivational. So for me, what I need to do is leverage the urgency that I feel, the emotional urgency. And with the Gold Coast, it was neuroses and a deep anger that I felt towards the place and the people there that propelled me for many years. But now that I've come to terms with it, and now that it's out in the world, and the work and my story has been recognized, and people look at the place differently, and the people who live in the place also see a different perspective, the urgency is gone. I feel that the perspective has been recognized in a way that it was never ever recognized when I was living there, which is what contributed to how mad I was about it. But this work, as a personal work, yes, it is about my life. And as life continues, you could argue that I'll keep shooting it, and I will. I am still making work, but at a certain point, I feel the urgency start to ebb, because I've come to terms with my lot in life at the moment. So I kind of have to wrap it up in a way, because I know that my time with it is coming to an end. I think it's a feeling.
Yes, that's very, very realistic. And like also incredibly, Susan told me this earlier, that your wit is very sharp and you're a really excellent communicator. And I feel like you just really zing in there with these very thoughtful, poetic points that are just hitting really deeply.
Thank you.
So, yes, Ali, we will work on getting the recording of this available. We'll let you know. So does anybody else have any other actually, I have a question. Can I ask a question? Is that okay?
Of course.
Wait, Masimba raised a hand.
Oh, hey, Masimba.
Hey, bud. Do you want to type it out, or do you want to talk? Oh, there you are. Okay.
I guess it's too late.
Yes, talk.
I think firstly, Ying, your work is exceptional, and there's a context to this, because I think living in South Africa, we've got two visual narratives that we're so familiar with. And I think that's the British and the American. And I recall seeing your work on the 6 Feet website. And I was just like, oh goodness, this is quite something. I mean, because you start delving into yourself and you get to a point where you start to try and understand it. And I think it's so crucial, because I think for a lot of us, we don't get really see or appreciate or understand the language that's coming out of Australia. And my question is, you mentioned that you were looking for publishers and you hadn't found one. And I was curious to find out if you had specifically been looking at Australian publishers. And if you were,
No.
okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, continue. If there's another
Oh
part
yes,
to your
sorry.
question.
And if you were, I was curious to see if you'd consider looking in a different environment where the visual language is different or not so appreciated, in the hope that maybe the book would find more relevancy and a bigger audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty complex, those are pretty complex considerations for me. So I have not really looked in Australia for any publishers, because my world in photography was not built in Australia. It was built in New York and in Europe. So all of my contacts are overseas, which means that when I physically begin the journey to find a publisher, my first step was to go to Unseen Festival in Amsterdam. And then my second was Paris Photo in November. And just going to the book fairs and making appointments with people that I managed to get a connect with, or that I had a previous connect with, to show them the work and essentially ask them if they would be interested in publishing it. And finding the right publisher and the right fit for the work has been quite a challenge, because you have these like great publishers where you know that they make really, really beautiful product and that they have great distribution, like Mac or Dowie Lewis. But at the same time that this was happening, when I went to Paris Photo, the Gold Coast book was also featured in an anthology of photo books by women. And it was celebrated at Paris Photo with a panel discussion on women in publishing. And the discussion was extremely passionate, extremely heated, and devastating, with how few women are represented in photo book publishing, whereas the gatekeepers are largely female. So a lot of publishers are women, a lot of editors are women, and yet the representation of women in photo books is extremely, extremely small. And the panels were almost a call to arms, in a way where men and women both had to make an active effort to overcome those disproportionate statistics. So then I started thinking about what I wanted in a publisher. And for me, I ideally would want a female publisher at this point. I want somebody that really understands the work and will do justice to it in its physical form as well as in its digital form. And that becomes an issue as well with a book so custom made, because it makes it very expensive, and publishers are trying to, increase their profit margins as well. So that becomes a challenge. And the other thing is that in order for them to make up the numbers, they need to publish a certain number of books to make to sort of increase their margins. And for me, this is where that question of perhaps intimacy and vulnerability in the work comes into play, because I don't want, even if it were possible, even in the heyday of monographs, 8,000, 5,000 copies of my book, I don't even want 500 copies of my book made. I want, it's like 280 copies of my book made, and that is the exact number of days my child was in gestation. So to find a publisher that's willing to support those conditions at this point in time. I've only met one that I feel like is a really great fit, and since coronavirus, she's not taking any new projects this year. So if you have any recommendations, send me an email, but I am kind of out of options at the moment, so it might be that self-publishing route.
Yeah, thank you so much for covering the complexity of that too. I think that's really helpful. We have a message from Britt, who is also one of my favorite photographers photographing a child right now. And she said, there's no question, just wanted to say that as a new mom to my 6-month-old daughter, I resonate so much with what you've shared. The images evoke many emotions for me in relation to the process of becoming a mother. Thank you for making work that speaks to the psychological challenges of being a new mom. You have truly inspired me and validated my own experience.
Wow, thank you. I mean, I don't know. Shout out to all those women out there who've had babies. It's my hat's off to all of you. And yeah, I mean, I suppose, I think after having a kid, I've had conversations with friends who haven't had babies, and I'm 40, so I have a lot of friends who are sort of around my age group and who find themselves in a situation where they may not be able to have children, or who struggle to have children. And I've just said that, if there's one thing I've learned, is that there's fulfillment, there's a fullness in life to be found at both ends of that experience of being a woman and being a man, if fatherhood is something that's on your mind. But there's an incredible book by an author called Sheila Heti, Sheila, last name Heti. It's called Motherhood, and she's just like this incredible Jewish intellectual who wrote a book at 38, actively interrogating the idea of whether or not she should be a mother. Active interrogation, a critical analysis, which is quite rare. And her motive was that to drive a car, you need to study and get your driver's license. Any big decision that you want to make, from buying a house or what laptop you're going to buy, you interrogate and you do the research for. And often the need and the want to have a child remains in this sort of like murky ether. And she found herself like physically really wanting to, and then wondering, oh, do I really want to? And is it something, her partner didn't really want to, and it became very confusing for her. So she really passed it out.
Yep, you're back.
I'm sorry, I'm back. She really passed it out in a way that was very, very interesting for me to read. And even somebody who, like, I read it after I had a baby already, and it was still extremely interesting. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting too, because I think your book does a thing that I think is very brave, which is most of the time we're allowed to have that critical analysis in advance. But I remember questioning post having children, and it was those were conversations in a way we weren't allowed to have. It was sort of like, there can be no ambiguity here. You've signed up, and that you allow your photography to express the conflict, I think is unique in that particular realm.
Yeah, I mean, making the work felt very taboo and definitely had its consequences. It had a really big effect on my marriage, because as you can imagine, a very common experience in fatherhood in the early days is one of being left out, or being a sense of gain, but also a sense of loss. You've gained a child and you've lost your wife as you knew her, your lover as you knew her. And so I not only was consumed with 2-hour feeds and not enough sleep, but in my waking hours and in my intellectual hours, it was all I read about. It was all I talked about. It was, it was all I thought about. And not really being able to leave the house, you know, it was the only thing that my partner thought I was obsessed, consumed with it. And it really had an impact on our relationship, where, you know, there's a sort of cost for everything. You know, it's kind of like with any project, I suppose, kind of, it's, for me anyway, making a project is almost like doing a PhD in how consuming it is. And it's like 4 years of obsession over a minute detail that nobody else cares about.
Yeah. Any other questions? We're kind of winding down in our time. Anybody sitting on a question or a comment?
Can I say a couple of things?
Please.
I wanted to thank everyone that came. I also wanted to thank my friends who came, because I see your faces popping up on my screen, and it just makes me feel, it's really made me feel connected in a way that I actually didn't realize I was missing and haven't found since this whole coronavirus thing went down. So thank you so much for coming, and for, even if I haven't seen your face, making yourselves known in your questions. And I don't know when this book is going to come out. I assume, I mean, I've postponed it to potentially September, leading up to the New York Art Book Fair, but I don't know. If you're interested in the work, if you want to know more, if you want to see more, or if you want to know when it comes out, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to talk about it, or answer whatever questions that you have.
And I just want you to check the comment section before you sign out, because folks are just sending you some really lovely personal messages that I think would be nice for you to read before you leave.
Yeah. I mean, that would be great, because, you know, I mean, I'm not immune to the perception that this kind of work is navel gazing or self-indulgent, or like, who wants to know about having a baby, how boring, you know, like I'm not immune to those perceptions, and they cast doubt on my work frequently. And I have had many episodes where I've just decided to give up and say, what's the point? Nobody cares. So the words of support definitely help. Given a platform like this to speak about the work and my practice and my personal practice, because again, who cares what my daily life is like during coronavirus, is very special. So thank you guys at Life at 6 Feet for allowing that, and for encouraging it, and for encouraging connection through this very, very, very strange and very isolating time. So yeah, I just wanted to say that too.